The 1980s introduced some disturbing toys that intrigued kids but left parents horrified. From eerie dolls that looked like they belonged in horror films to playthings that posed serious risks. This list from the 1980s will make you wonder how these ever made it to store shelves. Let's dive in with Boglins. Nothing screamed questionable parenting decisions like bringing home a rubber goblin with glowing eyes and a permanent smirk. Tim Clark, who worked with Jim Henson on things like The Dark Crystal and Fraggle Rock, created the Boglins. They looked and felt like high-quality and improved movie props. Boglins were marketed as interactive, ugly cute hand puppets. But let's be honest, they looked like an eyesore. Their slimy, wrinkled texture and freakishly expressive eyes made them more unsettling than fun. And the worst part of this toy is their eyes. They were made of an artificial rubber known as kraton, and their first models had glow-in-the-dark green eyes. Those eyes glowed in the dark like some stalker waiting for you to drift off. A lot of kids loved them, but parents? They were probably one flickering light bulbs away from throwing these straight into the trash. Madballs. Imagine trying to play catch with a giant bloodshot eyeball in a rotting zombie head. You just entered the world of Madballs. The toys were rubber or foam collectible bouncing balls with grotesque faces and designs. These squishy, grotesque, horror-themed balls were packed with pus-filled warts, exposed brains, and missing eyeballs. Basically, every single thing our parents and elders had told us to stay away from. Teachers, dentists, and parents find this particular toy dangerous, but kids of the 80s go crazy for these disgusting things. Sure, they were fun to throw around, but nothing is fun when your parents consider this toy harmful. Before we go on, did you know a popular toy turned nightmare with inspiration from movies also came from the 80s? Can you guess the toy? More on that soon. But first, here's a toy inspired by a famous 1983 horror comedy blockbuster movie, Gremlins electronic toys. The Gremlins movie warned kids not to mess with these creatures. So what did the toy companies do? They went ahead and made a whole line of creepy, malfunctioning electronic versions of creatures that kids were asked not to mess around with. Manufacturers, including LJN, produced versions of the fictional character Gizmo as dolls or stuffed animals, the later of which became a popular high-demand toy during the holiday season of 1984. Gizmo and the Gremlins were mass-produced as action figures, and Topps printed trading cards because of the film. The worst part? These things glitched like a possessed doll in a horror movie. Batteries would die, and instead of cute chirps or sounds, you get demonic, glitchy static that sounded like Satan whispering through the walls. It had a don't get them wet rule, and kids, being who they are, would try things that ended exactly how you'd expect they would turn out. These toys were not fun to parents. They could be described as always waiting for an anxiety attack to happen while having them around. Ooze-It doll. Suppose there is one thing this company did right. In that case, it was giving this toy the most befitting name because of the appearance and mess it causes. And all of that was enough to get parents so irritated. This disgusting rubber doll had bulging alien eyes and a sinister grin. And the main fun feature was that when you squeezed it, green slime oozed out of every single hole on its body. Sounds fun until you realize there's ooze everywhere, and you've got to clean up. Parents quickly realized they did not want to continue cleaning dried slime off carpets. This slime is a non-toxic, viscous, squishy, and oozy green or other color material made primarily from guar gum. Slime uses borax, a boron compound, to give itself that gelatinous texture. Parents in the 80s were warned that excessive exposure to boron can cause skin irritation, diarrhea, vomiting, and cramps. So, let's be real. If you were a parent, would you need this kind of mess? E.T. Finger Light Toy. Although iconic and creative, much about this toy still makes no sense to date. Imagine you're making a toy based on the iconic E.T. the Extraterrestrial back in the day. And what did you choose to sell? His glowing finger, just his finger. This was unintentionally questionable. Where did that idea come from? What happened to its entire framework? Kids wanted to use this toy to reenact the famous phone home scene, but adults couldn't look past the uncomfortable design. Why? It's because this wrinkly old finger looks more like a prop from Boogie Nights than a toy from a kid's movie. It's no wonder they eventually switched to a whole hand version of this toy as they kept remodeling it. The real Ghostbusters Fearsome Flush. At first, you would think this toy was produced because of the movie Ghostbusters, but it was nothing close to that. However, the Ecto-1A and Ecto-Charger were both related to the movie. Wherever the manufacturers of this toy had gotten their inspiration from, a haunted toilet as a toy? The manufacturers thought kids needed a demon toilet to play with. What on earth were they thinking? It started as an innocent-looking toilet, but when you open the lid, bam! Out comes a terrifying tongue, demon eyes, and razor-sharp teeth. The scariest part? It works too well on these kids, and their parents sometimes. Some kids got so freaked out they wouldn't go near an actual toilet. Imagine parents explaining to teachers why their kids were now afraid to use the bathroom at school. It did not serve any purpose, and soon, parents did not want it near their kids. My Pet Monster. From starting as a plush doll to evolving into a giant bright blue furry creature with a monster grin, plastic shackles, horns, blue fur, a fanged smile, and a handcuff. Children could also wear the handcuffs with a breakaway link to simulate breaking the chain. Sure, it was meant to come out as a cute doll, but those wild eyes and fanged grins made it look one bad day away from attacking your entire family. Parents didn't know what to do with it. Was it cuddly? Was it terrifying? One thing was certain, if you woke up at night and saw it staring at you from the shelf, you would surely end up terrified. Even with all these terrible attributes, several versions of the doll were released in various sizes and other attributes. In Humanoids figures, created with the sole purpose of representing an action figure, but ended up being a flop. Most action figures look cool, but these looked like they belonged in a horror museum. The toy and the movie were released the same year, so you can't spot which inspired the other. The Humanoids weren't just ugly, you could see bones on them. From exposed ribs, half-melted faces, and zombie-like eyes that felt way too realistic for comfort. Parents didn't want to see these things on the floor in the middle of the night or have their kids addicted to always playing around with them. My Buddy Doll. What was meant to be a cute friendship doll for boys inspired the most famous killer doll ever. My Buddy Doll was a cheerful, overall-wearing, permanently grinning little freak that, if left alone in a dark room, looked like it was planning something sinister. Kids loved this particular doll until the Chucky movie came out, and suddenly, he wasn't as friendly anymore. It became one of the most fearful toys of that century. Pee Wee Herman Doll. Hitting the number 5 spot is the Pee Wee Herman Doll. Paul Rubens decided to take his character and turn it into a toy. And if there ever was a toy that parents immediately regretted buying, it was the talking Pee Wee Herman Doll. Now, Pee Wee was a hit on TV with his quirky humor, but something about his plastic, grinning, bow-tied version did not feel right. First off, the face. This thing had a fixed, wide-eyed stare that was too lifelike, like a possessed dummy waiting for midnight to move on its own. Then there was his voice box, featuring phrases from the show that sounded fine when Pee Wee himself said them, but straight up horrified when heard alone in a dark room. This doll quickly turned into the thing that stayed in the back of the closet, out of sight, where it couldn't plot against you and make you end up hating the character Paul Rubin got to play. Garbage Pail Kids figures, intentionally made to imitate the Cabbage Patch Kids trending then. These were grotesque, absurdly nasty figures based on the wildly controversial trading cards. Instead of adorable, wide-eyed baby dolls, Garbage Pail Kids had names like Leaky Lindsay, a kid permanently dripping snot, Barfin' Ben, and Potty Scotty. Parents hated them because they were disgusting, crude, and weaponized bad taste. Each sticker card featured a Garbage Pail Kid character, with some comical abnormality, deformity, and/or suffering a painful fate, with a humorous character name such as Atom Bomb or Blasted Billy. These made a lot of parents quite scared of the impact it had on their kids. Stretch X-Ray. Remember Stretch Armstrong? The action hero who could be pulled in every direction? Well, someone at the toy factory looked at him and thought, you know what this needs? Internal organs. Enter Stretch X-Ray, the transparent version of Stretch, with exposed muscles, a visible rib cage, and weird gloopy-looking guts inside. It was part science toy, part body horror experiment. It was originally meant to teach kids about the body's internal organs, but it didn't turn out that well. Kids couldn't stop stretching and squishing him, fascinated by whatever strange jelly-like substance was floating inside. Meanwhile, parents looked at this thing and couldn't understand why they were letting their kids play with a medical freak show. Eventually, kids tore these open just to see what was inside. Creepy Crawlers, plastic goop version. Over time, creepy crawlers have continued evolving even after being discontinued at some point. The manufacturers probably said, let's give kids a toy oven filled with plastic liquid and let them bake their rubbery bugs. Kids are known for responsible handling of burning hot surfaces and molten chemicals. The risk involved in giving a child that toy made it even worse for parents. Creepy crawlers let children pour plastic goop into little metal molds shaped like insects, then cook them in an oven until they harden into squishy, stretchy creatures. This seemed fun, except that the plastic goop could produce toxic fumes. The little metal plates got scorching hot, and kids inevitably burned their fingers while pulling their creations out of the oven. Imagine having to treat burns all the time for your kids because of a toy you bought. If the insanely unsafe design didn't worry parents, the sheer amount of rubber bugs scattered all over the house did. Blurp Balls. At the top of the Who Approved This list sits Blurp Balls, a series of baseball-sized monster heads that projectile-vomited tiny creatures when squeezed. This was a toy built around puking, and each Blurp Ball had a different theme, featuring designs like Spitball Louie, who coughed up a green blob, Upchuck, a bulldog with a guy's head in his mouth, and Trolley Roger, a pirate who spewed up a skull. Not only did these toys glorify vomiting, but the tiny things they spit out were literal choking hazards. So they made a mess and threatened kids' lives, which was one of the reasons why parents were so disturbed about having the toy in their space. It's no surprise these things disappeared off the shelves after a while. The real mystery is, why were they made in the first place? Looking back, it's hard to believe some of these toys ever existed. Luckily, toy regulations have improved, and today's toy industry is much more careful about what makes it to the store shelves. Even with all the improvements, these bizarre creations will forever be a part of toy history. What do you think? Are these childhood nightmares? Or just misunderstood classics? Subscribe to our channel to discover more about vintage America.